Today, we're joined by a musician that wears all kinds of hats in the extreme metal underground. These days, he's helping steer one of the most exciting historical metal projects on the planet. He's the frontman for Exhumed, Gruesome, and the guitarist and vocalist, channeling the spirit of Chuck Schuldiner in Left to Die. Ladies and gents, it's the incomparable Matt Harvey. Matt Harvey, thanks so much for joining us. How are you, man?
I'm good, man. I just got home from Australia a couple days ago. It's summertime. It's a beautiful day. Blue skies, birds are chirping, car engines are going. It's a good day.
Yeah, it looks beautiful. Where on the planet do we find you now? Where is home for you?
I am in San Luis Obispo, California. I live basically one town over in Atascadero.
We're here today to talk about Left to Die. You have an album coming out, and it is, so far, the two releases that we've heard that have been put out are incredibly familiar. And for those death metal fans that love death, are probably going to recognize the sound being very familiar. For those who are new to one Matt Harvey and Left to Die and Exhumed and Gruesome and your whole history, give everybody an overview of who you are and how you got to be in Left to Die.
I'm a kid from the San Francisco Bay Area. Well, I'm not a kid anymore, but that's where I grew up. And I got into metal sort of in the late 80s. And just as I was kind of becoming a non-terrible guitar player was right when, Leprosy and then Slowly We Rot, Severed Survival, Symphonies of Sickness, and the sort of death metal boom was just really getting underway at the end of the 80s, going into the 90s. My high school band, Exhumed, sort of has continued out of control for some reason. On and off since the early 90s when I was in school. We finally, got our shit together by like 98 and did our first record. We've done a bunch of records. And at some point I got a call to help out with the first Death to All tour when Stefan from Obscura, I guess his visa was screwed up or something. So that was kind of my first entry into the ever widening pool of death related stuff. I thought it was great, but I was like, how come they're not doing anything with like, Chris Reifert or Rick Ross or Terry Butler or any of these guys? Because, as much as I love and respect the later stuff, my favorite stuff is the stuff I kind of cut my teeth on when I was a kid. That's where I met our drummer Gus, and then we sort of jokingly were like, yeah, if we can't get Death to All to, do a bunch of early stuff, like we'll just make our own death band and that'll be hilarious. And for some reason we actually did. And that band became Gruesome. And that sort of got legs weirdly, which surprised me. And from there.
Oh, it's awesome. It's awesome. That really surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was like, I don't know that people want to hear a band whose whole mission is to sound like another band, but apparently they did, and so we continued on. I mean, it wasn't. I don't mean to sound like glib, but like when we did the first Gruesome record, I just kind of thought it was like an elaborate, like a joke band almost, And I remember my wife talking to me. She's like, "Really, start another death metal band? Like, aren't you already in a death metal band? If you're going to start another band, don't you want to do something different?" And I was like, honey, this is like, come on. I don't see this going anywhere. I doubt we'll ever play a show. Like, this is just, silly. I'm just doing this for me. And I think it's, obviously I put a lot of work into it and try to make a good record, because I have a, deep love for the source material that we're sort of riffing on. But yeah, I did not see any kind of, commercial potential there. Apparently, it's one of those times when it's great to be wrong.
Yeah.
And because Gus and I were doing this sort of death worship band that got legs, we ended up doing a gig with Terry and James Murphy where we did spiritual healing front to back in Florida, which Rick saw and he was like, oh, these guys would do a really good job with Leprosy. I wonder if they'd be into it. And of course, we're like, well, yeah, of course we would. Like, duh. And so then that was kind of how Left to Die, came together. So we had a lot of fun doing the early death stuff live, doing a bunch of Leprosy and Scribbly Gore cuts. And, again, it was one of those things where just sort of gained its own momentum and took off. And so from the kind of minute that we announced that we were doing it, people kept asking us, "Are you going to record anything? You guys going to write any songs? Are you going to do anything?" And I was like, I don't know if that's a good idea, but we kind of hit upon the idea to do Initium Mortis, which is all the early, Mantis and Death tunes that Rick and Chuck and Cam Lee were working on, in the kind of early mid '80s or whatever, because most of them, had only ever been recorded on like a boombox. So we thought it was a good way to
Wow.
to do a record without kind of having the pressure of like, well, it's not as good as Leprosy. It's like, well, of course it's not as good as Leprosy. Like, even if it was as good as Leprosy, it wouldn't be as good as Leprosy. So, we didn't want to kind of fall into that trap.
So I have to ask, Chuck is, in my world, a legend. And frankly, Matt, you do a really good job of filling that void. What does Chuck mean to you? What does he mean to you? You never met him, but yet you are stepping into his shoes literally and playing his music. What does he mean?
I mean, well, I guess I technically met him when I was a kid in October 1990. I went to see, it was my second time going to a Death gig, and it was Death, Pestilence, and Carcass. And I did meet him, and I got him to sign my flyer and stuff. And I told him, I was like, "Oh, I'm learning how to play guitar. I'm like learning all your riffs, and it's really cool. And it's cool how every album is like more challenging because it's like I'm trying to get better, and you're always like several steps ahead of me, and I'm trying to figure it out." And he was like, "Oh, that's cool, man. Right on." It was very nice. But yeah, I didn't know him. That was the extent of my interaction. As a guitar playing singer or a singing guitar player, I don't really know. It was kind of like first there was, Hetfield from Metallica, and then there was like Mille from Creator, and then, then there was Chuck. And I think what the most important thing that his music did for me, aside from, like I said, kind of always being several steps ahead and me being like, "Oh shit, you can do this now. Oh, you can do that now. Oh, you can do this. Wow." Was that when I was learning the Death stuff very early on, I started with Metallica, then I went to like Celtic Frost, and then it was the Death stuff. There was a tonality about it that was different. Before I even knew what death metal was or that death metal was a thing, I was like, there's something about this, like these note choices and these kind of melodies, like, Metallica doesn't do this, Exodus doesn't do this, even Slayer doesn't really do this. And that was kind of the first sense that I had as a little kid that, oh, this is a different thing. This isn't thrash. This is its own thing, not just because of the kind of monstrous vocals. And so to me, his sort of melodic sensibility really informed not only the genre, because Death was influential to, everybody that came afterwards, and the people at the same time, but to me specifically, it was the first kind of like light bulb moment. Like this is its own subgenre here. This is its own thing with its kind of own parameters. And I learned what those parameters were by learning Death songs. And then when I went to learn, Autopsy or Carcass or Dismember or whatever afterwards, I had at least a frame of reference from knowing how to play the Death stuff. Not always correctly, because I was listening to my cassettes and I was 14, but I was doing my best, and I got the general idea, So I mean, to me, it was just as a guitar player, really a huge eureka moment. And also one of the things that I think Chuck did, especially with Leprosy specifically, is that he kind of opened the door to better guitar playing, like, because I mean, if you think about like the more extreme thrash albums like Darkness Descends or Infernal Overkill or Pleasure to Kill or whatever, like none of those records really had good solos. I mean, even Rain and Blood, I mean, they they're fine and they serve the song,
Sure.
but they're not like musical or whatever. And so when you heard Leprosy, it was like, wow, there's room to be kind of musical in this really extreme style of music. And I think that he was the first person to bring that in. And you can hear his influences from Sortilege and Iron Maiden and, Sabotage and all the traditional metal stuff that he loved. Even though he's kind of, because he never took lessons and didn't know any theory, he kind of has his own weird tonality to it, but that makes it even better,
Yeah.
So it was this idea that, yeah, you could be really brutal and you could be really extreme, but you could also be musical in ways that even bands that were more accessible, weren't, Persecution Mania or Extreme Aggression would have been more marketable in 1988 than Leprosy, but Leprosy was more musical, in some ways.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know, it was a huge thing to me as a kid. Yeah.
How do you balance, fast forwarding to present, how do you balance staying faithful to that original 80s era, death guitar partnership while still bringing your own natural energy to the mix?
Well, when we play live, I try to, pretty much do Chuck's solos, pretty close to how they are on the record. There's a few of them where, like Sacrificial, as long as you kind of have the first phrase, like nobody remembers the rest of the solo. So it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. But then there's a song like Forgotten Past or Pull the Plug where it's really distinctive. And if you don't play, the lead, it doesn't sound like the song. It's going to take you out of the song. So, live, really, it's just about executing Chuck's stuff. But when we were doing this record, all these songs are mostly recorded on a boombox, and they're high school kids playing this stuff. So I mean, the solos are rudimentary, and there's a lot of them because they're high school kids. And there's not a lot to latch onto that was particularly distinctive. So I kind of just came at it, thinking, turning on my sort of like spiritual healing brain, because that was the one. As a guitar player, especially once, James came in the mix, it was like, Chuck was melodic and had his own sensibility. And then James came in and he was sort of like, at that point in time, he was like a great value Andy LaRocque or, Timu Andy LaRocque, which was amazingly head and shoulders above anything that anyone had ever heard on a death metal record before. And obviously, I'm a big fan of Rick's playing. But Rick's in the band, so I don't need to do any dive bombs. Like that's already covered. So I knew that no matter how melodic I was going to get, he was always going to balance that out because that's what I think I love so much about Leprosy is that Chuck is trying to be as musical as possible. And Rick's like, fuck that shit. Like, check this out. This sounds like a cat getting strangled or whatever. And it's just so brutal and awesome. So I knew that was covered. So I just kind of, went for my own thing, but, leaning a little bit more heavily on what I would have heard, Chuck or James do back then. Because I also think James did a nice job coming into Obituary, balancing the musicality with the really primitive, brutal riffing, which is not too far away from what's on this record,
I had a couple people ask me to ask you, really, is Left to Die going to replace Gruesome, or is Gruesome going to remain your baby on the side? Like, how's that going to work? And is Left to Die going to be something that is going to continue and maybe create its own albums with its own original music?
It's one of those things where we're just kind of playing it by ear. With Gruesome, I think we've really, covered certainly my personal favorite era of death. And also, it seems maybe less necessary to pay homage to the stuff that Bobby and Gene did because Bobby and Gene are still out there playing it. Whereas, Sean obviously is no longer with us. Chuck is no longer with us. And, I don't know how much interest Paul really has in playing Secret Face, or whatever. So, I certainly, I have nothing but respect and admiration for, the guys doing Death Hall. I think Bobby is incredible. Gene and Steve, obviously, legendary. And Max is fantastic. So I don't know that Gruesome doing a version of Symbolic makes a ton of sense when those guys are out there playing it, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't want to do something further, but I don't really know. I just kind of take things as it feels natural, But I also kind of feel like I don't know that I really want Left to Die to write our own material because I think the weight of expectation is just so high. And, doing Gruesome, the whole thing is a tribute. And I think it's very clear that I'm just doing it as a fan, whereas to write our own songs and Left to Die maybe feels a little bit like I am trying to be like, I'm the new Chuck, which I'm not, and
Right.
nobody is, and nobody could ever be. And I don't,
Yeah.
as a fan, I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't go out there and play a stealth and, wear a Blondie t-shirt or, do whatever, try to be like, if you squint your eyes, oh, is that Chuck? It's like, no, it's just me.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what the future holds, and it's just really kind of what feels natural and what makes sense. Because at the same time, I don't know if Rick came to me and had like 4 songs that I just was like, these are too good to not record, then I guess we would record them, And
Yeah.
really with Left to Die, it's ultimately about Terry and Rick, executing the early stuff. And I'm here to help them however they want to be helped and to do things that make sense to everybody, So I know it's
Do
kind of
you
invasive.
do you personally, or do you as a band Left to Die, do you see that project as sort of like a cultural preservation of that, that tape trading, early death era, in especially now in a time where we're in, digital madness where tape trading doesn't really exist anymore?
Right. I mean, I see it as a preservation of a part of the Death legacy, because as much as I love what they do with Death to All, even in the very early stages before it kind of evolved into being more like a real band like it is now, I
Mhm.
kind of felt like the preservation of the legacy was heavily weighted towards, look at, they brought in jazz fusion and, weird time signatures, and they, the musicianship is so amazing, and all that's 100% true, and it's great and deserves to be celebrated. But I also kind of felt like, hey, over here there's also like really fucking brutal. um,
Yeah.
and that's kind of, was my approach even with the first Gruesome stuff that we were writing, was to be like, hey, yeah, but it was also really fucking brutal, man. Like, have you heard Regurgitated Guts? Like, come on, man. So I think it's about kind of, just giving a more even-handed, sort of representation of the breadth of the Death legacy, because, I think that's one of the things that is so impressive about the band, is that it sort of revolutionized things twice. There's not that many bands that are able to do that. I mean, there's not that many bands that are able to sustain a career in multiple decades, and let alone adapt to the times, or let alone sort of be trailblazers multiple times.
Yeah.
And especially within such a compressed time period. If you think even the first Mantis tape to Human, I mean, that's only 83 to 91. That's 8 years. That's like 2 album tour cycles at this point. So to go from Legion of Doom on a boombox to, Flattening of Emotions in 8 years is pretty crazy, you know?
You've talked a lot about Death's legacy. Ed Repka, who did a number of the early artwork for Death and also for Gruesome.
Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Repka's work. I grew up with it, and he did great work for Gruesome. Just the licensing of the artwork was a little bit less restrictive with Goldsworthy, and he's worked with us on a bunch of shirt designs previously, because Ed Repka being capital E, capital R, Ed Repka, he's not the kind of guy that we can afford to just be like, hey, can you just knock out this design for 300
Oh, okay.
t-shirts. Whereas Dan Goldsworthy
That's
was,
fair.
sort of, so we had been working with him already for quite a while. And he absolutely captures that Repka vibe, that old school vibe. So it just, made sense to continue working with him,
What's the craziest thing that you've come across regarding either yourself or Left to Die or any of the projects you've been in? What's the strangest thing that you've found so far, or the most
Well, I think
left field bunch of bullshit?
I mean, I think with Left to Die, it is a little confusing for people, because it's like, even I was like trying to explain what the band was to like my dad, who doesn't know anything about death metal or whatever, aside from the fact
Mhm.
that I play it and he doesn't particularly care for it. I was like, well, so it's like a tribute band, but we have 2 guys from the original band, so it's like, let me put it in terms you understand. Like, if John Fogerty died, but like 2 of the guys from Creedence had some other guy singing, and he's like, huh, no, that's sort of weird. And then it's like, well, they're new recordings of old songs, but they're old songs you probably haven't heard of. So you think that they're new songs. And, so I think the misconception with this band is that somehow that there's some adversarial relationship between any of us and, the
Mm.
Schuldiner family or whatever, which it's like, dude, we're on Relapse, we're on the same label that's putting out all the Death stuff, that works with the Schuldiner family really closely. Like, Terry and Rick have known Beth forever, and they've known Christopher since like he was a fucking child. Like, they've come to our shows and talked to us, and we wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't cool with them. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like, there's this weird idea that there's some sort of adversarial relationship, and that's a real bummer for me because like, I'm just a fan. I wasn't there in the 80s or whatever. I'm just happy to be here, so I don't want people.
Yeah.
It just makes me sad that people would think that we would do that. It's one thing if they don't like the band or they don't want to come see us or they don't like the record. That's totally fine. I don't care about that. There's nothing I can do about that. But if they misconstrue, like somehow we're out here trying to like strip mine Chuck's legacy, or we're like ripping him off or something, it's like, no, when we sell like Leprosy LPs at a show, like we buy those like a record store and resell them. You know what I mean? Like, they're absolutely getting paid on everything that we're doing. And, in terms of the writing credits on the album or whatever, Chuck is, credited on everything. And, so it's all really in a sense of collaboration and deepening this, this body of work. So I guess that is, I don't know if it's the craziest misrepresentation I've heard. Somebody told me like, this is years ago now, I guess. I was talking to this girl and she's like, oh yeah, somebody told me like, you're like really rich. And I was like, wow, well, somebody lied, girl. Sorry. So, clearly then she's, it didn't work out with her and I, which is fine.
Yeah.
So another question that I had from a longtime Death fan is, what's your what song when you're playing it live, you just feel it every single time and you're just into it and in the groove?
I mean, it really depends. I guess night after night. I mean, like these are songs that I learned to play, or I played along with, and tried to learn to the best of my ability. When I was like 14, 15. So these are like core musical memories, and each one will catch me. Really, it just it's a bunch of factors like how good we feel like we're playing and how well I can hear on stage, and if my wrist hurts or my voice, if I have to push harder or whatever. But generally, there's every song you kind of get a moment where it just clicks, and you look out in the audience and someone's like losing their mind. My favorite song is maybe Regurgitated Guts. I don't know. So when it's that song, I get extra stoked because it's not like a hit. Obviously Pull the Plug, Open Casket, Leprosy, Evil Dead, like those are Zombie Ritual. Those are the hits. So, I mean, to me, it's like, wow, if Evil Dead's not hitting, then, either the sound sucks or we're out of tune or something bad's happening. But when it's like Torn to Pieces or Primitive Ways or one of those songs that maybe isn't as well known, and you look out, and even if it's just like three diehard maniacs who are like, and you feel it too. You're like, yeah, dude, I would be you, man. If I didn't have to play these songs, I'd be out there, like getting totally stoked too, And I think the song that kind of tends to work the best live, that's, maybe more of a dark horse, is Choke on It. That one, is maybe more of an overlooked song on the record, but live, more times than not, it ends up like really coming across really well, and it's a lot of fun to play. And like I said, when you look out, you just see, even if people are like, yeah, this is cool, but I'm waiting for Zombie Ritual, but then you just see some fucking deep cut maniac like losing his mind, or her, but generally it's some pimply faced weird kid or weird middle-aged man. That's a really you're like, yeah, we're right here, dude, we're doing this together, it's cool.
I'm a bit of a gear guy. I love talking equipment. What are you doing to replicate? Do you focus on like vintage 80s era gear? Are you using modelers to capture that sound, the right tone? And I guess this question would apply for both live setups and tracking in the studio.
I would never track with an amp modeler. Just that's not me. It's not something I feel comfortable with.
Sacrilegious.
But at the same, I don't know, it's not sacrilegious, but I mean, I guess, my thing is people are always like, oh, look at this thing. It does the same thing as an amp. And I was like, yeah, but I have an amp. So what do I need the thing that does what an amp does when I have the thing,
Sure.
It's fine for, if I'm just like dashing out a demo or whatever, and I don't feel like, cranking up the cabinet or whatever in the other room. Sure. I don't really care, but at the same time, I also feel like it's a trap to, get really obsessed with these vintage things because at the end of the day, you don't want it to sound exactly like that. You want it to sound how that feels. And as much as I would love to probably just play through a JCM 800 and put a tube screamer in front of it or whatever, it's nice using my two main amps are 6505 plus and a Angle Powerball, and that's what I recorded the album with. And then I have a variety of drive pedals. My favorite is it's built by a guy named Michael Klein, who he builds a lot of effects for Sammy from Acid Bath and Goat Horn. He's done a bunch of stuff for a bunch of people now, and he's finally starting to blow up. But I've been working with him for years, and he's a genius. So he decided to pedal for me. Go ahead.
That pedal, is that a custom unit, or is it available? Is that something people can buy?
I think I'm not sure if he is selling it, or I'm sure he's selling it, but I'm not sure if it's called the same thing. Because mine is called a Slimer pedal, because it's like green slime, like a tube screamer, and it is like a tube screamer, but it has a little bit more flexibility with the EQ. It doesn't kind of get into that pinched upper mids that the tube screamer has, which I like, but it is a bit limiting. And of course, I have various Maxon OD808 and a TS9 and a Maxon Super Distortion, and so all those sort of tube screamer flavors or whatever. But it's like I said, I don't want it to just get sucked into this thing. It has to be exactly like the 80s, because that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make you feel what you felt in the 80s.
It's capturing a vibe.
Yeah, and so that's what I use, and Rick is a big dual rack guy. He's into that very scoopy with a woofy low end, that loose low end, and that kind of presence crackle heavy high end that he likes. So I use the 6505 on one side to sort of get something similar to that. The low end's not as loose as a boogie, but it's headed in that direction. But I think that the high end breaks up in a way that is not as harsh. You don't want it to sound like you're grinding glass under your shoe, but you want it to be, you want it to be scratchy, but not, displeasing, I guess. I try to keep it simple, amps pushing air, but we're not going to sit there and spend thousands of dollars on vintage this and boutique that. It's just death metal, man.
Yeah, fair enough.
Left to Die's Enidium Mortis is coming out on Relapse July 17th of 2026. Matt Harvey, are you having fun?
I'm having such a blast, doing this band. It's one of those things where, if you would have told me, when I was 14, like, dude, you're going to have Rick Ross's phone number, I'd be like, what? What? It's way beyond anything that you would ever hope for as a fan. And I think, obviously, I would much rather that Chuck was alive to be doing this material or not doing this material. Maybe he would just be doing Control Denied. But I have to think at some point, somebody would offer him enough money, like, hey, bro, some play, rock him, but just do Leprosy something bad. He's like, I don't want to do that. They're like, well, but we'll give you $75,000. Like, okay, well, here we go. So I don't know. I would rather that he would have been here to have the option to do it or not. But, as a fan, I mean, this is way beyond anything that I could have ever hoped for. I see myself as sort of the stand-in for the audience. And like, that's why I don't worry about acting like Chuck or looking like Chuck or playing a stealth or any of that stuff, because it's like, I'm the guy from the audience who just happens to be lucky enough to be up here doing it. And I'm also, let it be known that I'm having a great time. Because, what's the point of being like, oh, it's such an honor and it's so this and that, which of course it is. But at the same time, if you're not enjoying it, then what's the point of all the honor and, oh, it's humbling and blah, blah, blah. It's like, great. What am I going to do? Sit there and like think about, oh God, if I play this note, I'm going to like disrespect my favorite album. Like, that's too much pressure for anybody. I just want to have fun and do a good show. And so far, it seems like we've been doing okay because people keep turning up to the gigs, and Rick and Terry seem to be happy with what I'm doing. So that's more important than some guy on YouTube or whatever, some commenter,
There's always plenty of commenters out there, aren't there?
I mean, that's fine. Like, I think it's great. Anything that adds to the discourse and whenever you're doing something that means so much to so many people, anything related to death is going to mean a lot to a lot of people. And with Chuck not being here, they're going to have their own very personal interpretations of it. And it's cool. If they like what we're doing, great. And if they don't like it, then, that's fine too. I get it, man. The music's really personal.
Well, I want to thank you. I've been a Death fan. I'm 52, and so I lived through the 80s, and it was Slayer, then Death.
Yeah.
For me, and then Metallica, and
Oh,
so
wow.
it's been so it's been really cool to just follow your career and follow what you've been doing. And a lot of people get excited about meeting their heroes. You get to actually step in for yours, and I think it's amazing, and I'm really happy for you.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it a lot. I turned 50 last October. And it's a weird ride. I try not to think about it too much because I just want to keep moving forward and keep doing the next thing and not sit around. I figure I'll sit around, eventually at some point and be like, holy crap, like I made a record with the guys from Leprosy and From Beyond. Like, that's pretty sweet.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's rad. Well, listen, before we let you go, I'd like to drop a little section we call Quickies. They're this or that questions. You can keep your answers short. You can go long, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
All right. First one, a playlist that perfectly matches your current mood, or a playlist that shifts you into the mood you want to have.
I will go with one that perfectly matches my current mood, because if I try to shift out of it, I have to, even if I'm really angry or unhappy or whatever, I need to just sit in it and live with it and get it out, or then it'll come around later. So my thing is, I'll get really angry for about 15 minutes, and then as long as whatever it is gets resolved one way or the other, then I just don't care anymore. That's fine. I can get on with it, and then I can the playlist that will fit my mood will be nicer.
Nice. A mind that is always perfectly calm and still, or a mind that is constantly flooded with brilliant, chaotic ideas.
I would say a mind that is still. Maybe it's just I'm a Californian that lives in a wine country beach kind of town or whatever. But the older I get, the sort of more into the sort of mindfulness and all that stuff. I'm not going to meditation classes or whatever. But when I was a kid, I had insomnia. My parents gave me this meditation tape to help me sleep. And it's something that I've come back to again and again and again. And we were just when we were in Perth, whatever it was last week, we went and did a sound bath and stuff. And it's I find that honestly, when your mind is still, then the ideas come on their own.
Do you meditate to come up with gruesome titles? Song titles. Is that where you get it from?
Usually it just comes sort of. It's one of those things where if you see it out of the corner of your eye, and if you try to focus on it too much, it runs away from you. Usually just a lot of it comes when I'm just out walking around or whatever. Like I remember Dimensions of Horror came when I was walking my dog. So, it's just things just come on their own. And
you never know an inspirational strike. Yeah.
Try to let them happen.
Let's see. Receiving incredibly harsh, brutal honesty. Did somebody just order a double quarter pounder with cheese?
No, sorry. My wife's, I'm right in front of my wife's shop, and a friend of ours just walked out.
I love it. Okay, let's see. Receiving incredibly harsh, brutal honesty that instantly makes you better at what you do, or warm, encouraging praise that keeps you motivated but doesn't fix the flaws.
I'm always seeking brutal honesty, but I'll qualify that. I'll say this. It's like when you go and play a show and someone comes up and they're like, hey, your sound sucked tonight. It's like, oh, okay, great. Or taking things that people post on, YouTube or social media and taking that to heart. I don't value that. But I have a lot of friends who I know and trust. And when I get feedback from them, that is really valuable, So it's kind of it's really tough. I think when you start out as a musician, it's so hard to get valuable feedback, and you're so much worthless feedback that you sort of have to get a bit of tunnel vision and just really focusing on doing whatever it is you're doing and not giving a shit at what anyone says. And then finally, once you're at a certain level, then you're able to often get valuable feedback, And that I love valuable feedback, especially when it's positive. But if it's negative, then I try to get it early so I can course correct.
Yeah. All right. Well, the last two are musical based, and then we'll
Yeah.
let you escape. A guitar tone that relies entirely on natural woody resonance of the instrument and hand technique, or a tone that is heavily sculpted, compressed, and distorted through a massive chain of rare or vintage analog gear.
Oh man,
You want it to come right from the guitar, or do you want to rely on the pedals and amps?
I mean, if I had to either or, I guess would probably take the compressed, distorted signal, because
Mhm.
ultimately, when you're playing high gain music, you're not really hearing the guitar. Like when people are like, "Oh, I've got this alder, ash, maple, whatever fretboard in this body," and it's like, yeah, but you got active pickups going through a fucking saturated amp. You're not hearing any of that. All you're hearing is electronics. So ultimately, what really matters is, does it feel good in your hand? And it could be, an Indonesian, Schecter straight off the factory line, or it could be, a 57 Les Paul. But if you're putting, Seymour Duncan blackouts like I use, and you're running it into an angle Powerball, you're hearing the blackouts. You're not hearing the guitar.
Right.
So
right.
I would rather walk more of a middle road. But if I had to choose between those two, I'll take the compressed, distorted chain.
Gotcha. Okay. And last one. A song built around an incredibly complex, jagged rhythm pattern that constantly shifts time signatures, or a song that locks into a heavy, relentless, hypnotic groove that doesn't change for 7.5 minutes.
Wow, 7.5 minutes is a long time.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, the first one sounds so unpleasant and demanding to play. I guess I'd have to take the hypnotic groove, but 7.5 minutes is a really long time. I think if you can't figure out how to make a good song in under 5 minutes, and I don't know if it's a good song. It's like when all these movies are like, oh, but the director's cut's 6 hours long and it's great. It's like, wow, I don't think I feel like it takes you 6 hours to make a good movie. Maybe you're not good at this. But if I had to do one, I guess I'll take the 7-minute move. Yeah.
I like it. Okay. Well, this has been great. We really appreciate you coming and spending some time with us, man.
Oh, my pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me. And hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you,
All
sir.
right.
On it. All right.
Cheers,
Thanks,
guys.
Matt.